today this is something a little bit different for me because I'm actually going to give a talk. Usually I do workshop-y kinds of things, which is in fact what I'll be doing this afternoon. But this is actually a talk. So I'm a little bit nervous. Forgive me if I'm a little bit anxious, and we'll see how it goes time-wise. But what I wanted to talk about today, this topic I've wanted to talk about for a while, is irrationality, is behavioral economics. Because as the title of my talk says, people are weird. People are fundamentally weird. We like to think that people are very rational and make good decisions for the right reasons. And the reality is, people make wacky decisions for reasons that you wouldn't expect. But the wackiness is actually kind of systematic. It's because of the way that we think. It's because of the way that we make decisions. And our lives, our work lives, our personal lives, our practice as people who work in agile environments could be a lot easier if we recognize some of the ways in which people are weird, in which people are mad, and recognize how we work in an agile way maybe helps counteract those things, or what are the things in our environment that we need to tweak in order to maximize the way that people naturally make decisions about things. A lot of this talk is based on the work of Dan Ariely. He's a behavioral economist, a researcher at Duke University. He's the founder of the Center for Advanced Hindsight, which I love the name of. And he has done an awful lot of research into how people make decisions, how people act. Has anybody seen Dan Pink's TED Talk about motivation, the autonomy, mastery, and purpose talk? A lot of the research that Dan Pink is talking about in that talk about what motivates people and how cash drives, or more to the point, doesn't motivate performance, is based on research that Dan Ariely has done. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today is based on Dan Ariely's work. So this is a picture of Dan Ariely. It's ironic that the caption on the meme, "May the force of rationality be with you," because as I said, most of his talk is about how people are fundamentally irrational, but how it's consistently irrational. And he's reproduced these things in lab environments. And he talks about these a lot in his work. He's written a number of popular books on the subject. Predictably, Irrational is the one that got me going, and the one that thought, oh, I gotta come and talk about this. There's also Truth About Dishonesty, there's The Upside of Irrationality, and he has a column in the Wall Street Journal. So if you're interested in learning more about some of the studies that I talk about today, or some of the ideas that I talk about today, I encourage you to go look up his work. He's also got some talks recorded online that are really quite entertaining. He's a very engaging speaker, so go check it out. So the first thing we're going to talk about in this talk is about procrastination. And I should come clean. In the course of preparing this talk, I walked about 8 kilometers on the treadmill. I drank at least a bottle of wine, a couple of pints of cider as well. I bought 3 pairs of shoes, and I watched an entire series of Californication. So the longer I did this, the more focused my talk became on procrastination, because I thought it was a really interesting phenomena, and it's something that's really important for us to consider, because, again, some of the conventional wisdom, the stuff we think about why people make decisions about deadlines and how people react to deadlines, first of all, really important in an agile universe, but also some of the research that's coming out is very counterintuitive to the way we conventionally think about these things. So this is where I want to start my talk today. So, procrastination. Procrastination isn't just delaying work. It's not making decisions about, I'm going to do this instead of this, when you have a good reason to do it. You know, I'm going to put aside I'm going to focus on this thing that my boss just dropped on my desk because it's on fire, as opposed to the thing that I thought I was going to do when I stood up and stand up this morning and said it. That's not procrastination. Procrastination is when we needlessly delay work, even though we know it's not in our best interest to do it, even though we know it could be harmful to our plans, or it could be harmful to our perceptions of the work, or ourselves, in fact. what I want you to do for a moment is we're just going to take a second before I tell you about some of the research in this area. I want you to think to yourself, I think you got a notepad in your bags and you might want to make a couple of notes here, is I want you to think about a couple of things that you procrastinate on. Because maybe there are people in this room who never procrastinate at all. It's possible. I can tell you the number of people I talked to in the course of preparing this talk, everybody was like, yeah, that's me, I do that. So I want you to think for a moment, what are 2 or 3 or 5 of the things that you procrastinate on regularly? What I also want you to do is just make a quick list, a couple of notes. I want you to think about how you feel when you think about that thing. When you think about that task that you put off, whether it's paying a bill or doing your performance review at work or certain conversations that you need to have that you keep putting off. How do you feel about those things? Let's just take 60 seconds here and I want you to sort of make that little list either in your head or on a piece of paper. And then I'm going to continue talking. Okay, everybody's had a chance to jot down a couple of things? People at the back of the room? Yeah, I got a list? Okay, we'll continue on. So, Dan Ariely was really interested in how people react to deadlines. So he did some research. Now, a lot of the research that I'm going to talk about today, a lot of it takes place in academic contexts, because the reality is that that's where a lot of psychological research happens. It's where a lot of academic research happens, because you have a willing pool of victims, participants, student population. But he wanted to understand the effect of deadlines on human behavior and on performance. And being a university professor who teaches, he had this perfect environment to do it because he has students and the students get assignments. He set up an experiment to test how deadlines affected performance. And the way he did this is, in one class, he said to the students, over the course of this term, you're going to have to submit 3 papers. I'm not going to read them to the end of the term. You have to hand them in on the last day of term. Organize your work however you want. With one of his other classes, he said, listen, you have to hand in these 3 papers. I'm not going to read them till the end of term, but I want you to set your deadlines for when you're going to hand in the paper. You set the deadline, you have to stick to it. If you miss your deadline, you'll be penalized a little bit. But you plan the work as you see fit. In the 3rd condition, he said, okay, let's submit work. You're going to submit work through the semester evenly spaced. You're going to hand in your papers week 4, week 8, week 12. You have no choice in the matter. Then he looked at which group of students was the most successful. Which of them were better at handing in the papers according to the schedule that was set, and which group performed better. How many people figured that group A did best? Just a quick show of hands. Nobody's like, okay, one brave person in the back. Yeah, sure. How about group B? How many people figured setting your own deadlines did best? Group C. Group C, majority. Okay. Because this is interesting, because this is in fact exactly what happened. When they looked at the results, they found that in terms of both meeting the deadline, but also the quality of the work, the students in Group C did the best. When they had an external deadline that they had to meet, they were better at organizing their work, but the quality of the work was better. And this is I thought this was a really interesting thing in the context of working with Agile teams, because we talk a lot about, the importance of people being able to set their own deadlines and things like that. And that's really important, because the reason that Group B actually wasn't as great as Group C is because there were a large majority of people who set reasonable deadlines and stuck to them. But there was also a pretty big subgroup in that class of people who were procrastinated, who basically were in the same situation as in Group A, where they left their work till the end of the term and then were rushed to do it at the last minute. And a lot of us are like that. A lot of us are really not very good at regulating our work according to deadlines. This is one of my favorite quotes. This is the author Douglas Adams. And he's famous for saying, I love deadlines. I love the whooshing sound they make as they fly by. And I know I work even with sort of externally set deadlines, I work with a lot of Agile teams who get to the end of the sprint, if they're doing Scrum, and it's like they still didn't get anything done. Whoosh, the deadline goes by. Can we extend the sprint? No, you can't. It's over when it's over. But why do people procrastinate? Why do people procrastinate? This is the question that I wanted to dig into here. And procrastination is really important to understand for a few reasons. First of all, because from a productivity point of view, obviously it's a big problem. We are not getting work done and our plans fall apart. But procrastination is also really stressful to individuals. It's stressful for the stress that it causes us and that, oh my God, I have this deadline coming, whoosh, and I'm not going to meet it. But there are longer terms effect in terms of lasting effect on cardiovascular health, on general well-being, partly because people who are chronically procrastinate about work may procrastinate about other things like taking care of their health. I don't know when the last time you went to the doctor was, but it's maybe been a while. It's something we really need to pay attention to. And the research is suggesting that 20% of us are chronic procrastinators. That is a pretty significant segment of our population. So maybe this is something that we want to pay attention to in our work environments and figure out how we are going to handle this phenomenon. Wow, procrastinating. I'm going to be through this presentation in half an hour, I think. The thing we really want to think about in procrastination, though, is it's not just about time management. When I asked you a couple minutes ago to make that list of things that things that you're procrastinating on, can anybody tell me the kinds of emotions that they put on the list? Anybody willing to speak up about what do you feel like when you think about those things that you're putting off? Sorry.
Is it really worth my time?
Is it worth your time? Okay, so that's a question. Should I be doing this thing? What else?
Fear.
Fear. A lot of fear. Wait, how many people put fear?
I didn't put fear, but you were only none of them were
Yeah.
happy joy or
None of them are happy joy. I'm putting off this thing to defer the pleasure of doing it. This is not why we procrastinate, right? There's a big element of fear, of apprehension, of discomfort. And this really, the research is showing, is part of why we procrastinate. It's not because we have bad time management skills, although that could possibly be a factor. It's because whatever the thought of facing whatever it is we need to do makes us uncomfortable. So we find other ways to deal with that, usually by doing something that makes us feel more comfortable. So maybe it's going and indulging in a more pleasurable pastime. I really, really need to write this talk, but instead I'm going to watch 3 episodes of Californication, and then I'm going to write the talk. Or it's I'm going to go do something that's important. This is important, but if I spend my time doing this arguably less important thing, I'm still using my time constructively, so that's okay. We really need to deal with the emotional aspects of this. Fear of failure. Fear, apprehension, performance fear is a big factor in procrastination. Because one of the factors that can be at play there is, I don't know if I'm going to do really well at this thing. I don't know if this talk is going to completely suck. So if I leave it to the last minute and I don't prepare really well, it's okay, because then I can blame it on not preparing. It's this insidious little mechanism. So we want to pay attention to these things. We need to pay attention to the feelings that people are experiencing when they are unnecessarily delaying the work that they need to do, so that we can find ways to address it, to help people get things done in a timely fashion, and get our work done, but also be happier and more productive and less stressed about the whole thing. So we need to find things. Sorry, I'm just going to check my notes about things that you might do to deal with this. The really important thing, the first thing is to recognize the emotional discomfort that's associated with procrastination. And go, yeah, notice what you're doing yourself, or notice what the people around you are doing. If the procrastinators are, your husband or your kids or your coworkers. Recognize that it's going on, recognize that it's a natural human reaction, and be prepared to deal with it. And notice that, hey, I'm not doing this thing because it's making me uncomfortable. Because one of the ways you can deal with it is just by noticing it and sucking it up and going, yep, it's going to be uncomfortable. It's okay that it's uncomfortable. I'm going to go off and do this thing and get through this. As opposed to going, ooh, scary, uncomfortable thing. I'm going to go do something that makes me feel good. Another thing that's really important to recognize in dealing with procrastination is recognizing that your future self is probably not going to want to do that thing any more than your present self does. We're really, oh, you know, I'm going to go to bed now because I will work better tomorrow on a good night's sleep than if I do this uncomfortable thing I don't want to do tonight. It's possible that earlier in the day you will feel less depleted, that you might be better able to cope with it. But it's also possible that, you know what, tomorrow you're not going to be doing that thing any more happily than you are today, so you might as well just get on with it. And this applies to long-term thinking as well as short-term thinking. There are a lot of things that we need to do. I'm thinking not so much in an agile world with your work, because ideally you shouldn't necessarily be thinking about what's happening in 6 months. But things like saving money, things like things like taking care of our health, that we put off doing because we think, oh, I'll worry about that tomorrow, I'll worry about that later. And then we never get to it. So we need to think about what our future selves and create a closer connection between our future self and our present self. Think about, I'm going to be the same person I am in 6 months and a year and whenever I'm putting this thing off to. And I'm probably going to feel the same way about this thing as I do today. Maybe I need to deal with it today. There was some other interesting research too, something that Dan Ariely talks about in a video, about calendars. And this I think is particularly applicable to agile teams. When we measure future events in the matter of weeks or years, how far away it is, it's much less urgent to us than when we measure things in how many days. And they did some research around how inclined people were to do long-term goals, like planning a trip or doing savings, when they talked about something that was going to happen 2 years from now, as opposed to something that was going to happen 730 days from now. And what they found is that when people measured time in days, suddenly those things that were way off in the future became much more pressing. And people thought, yeah, I better get started on that now. So it seems to me to be an interesting experiment to run. Very, very simple thing that you can start doing is start talking about your work plans in terms of the number of days rather than the number of weeks or the number of months. We have 10-day sprints, not we have 2-week sprints. Because a week, mentally, is a larger, more nebulous period of time. That's lots. I got weeks to do that. As opposed to 10 days, I better get going today. This is something to keep in mind. So, the good news about working in an agile way is sort of the time management part of it is really built into the way that we do work. If you have big visual task boards, you're helping to make the work very visible and very present. If you're breaking work into smaller tasks, this is really an important thing for procrastination because it's a lot easier to go, oh, I have this big thing to do. Okay, I'm just going to start to bite off a piece of the elephant and do that. And agile ways of working allow us to do that. They give us tools for making work visible, for slicing work into small chunks, for prioritizing that work. I think the prioritizing one is a bit of a double-edged sword though, because we do want to be working on the most important things all the time. But sometimes if you're feeling really emotionally blocked on something, it's more important to just get started on anything. Pick something and get moving on it to overcome that block that you're experiencing. And then you can go back to focusing on the most important thing. So I want to highlight that because that's a little bit counter to sort of to agile thinking, which says work on the most important thing all the time. If you're having troubles getting started on the most important thing, start on something. That will help. In addition to this, though, I think there are some things that go on in agile teams that help with procrastination that it's important to pay attention to. And this is part of the reason that I'm really interested in this subject, because you're going to go, well, yeah, obviously that works. But it's paying attention to the reason that this is why this works, I think is really important as we work to tune the agile environments that we work in and we figure out how to best organize our teams and support our teams. Is things like pairing and mobbing can be really, really powerful tools for overcoming procrastination. Because not just the peer pressure of, hey, we're gonna work on this now, we're gonna go work, let's work. That doesn't give you much out for going, no, I don't feel like working on that right now. But there's also some emotional support built into that. Hey, we're in this together, let's get going on this. I think that's really important to pay attention to. And it's a little tiny subtle thing that we don't necessarily think about. But I think it can help us to be more successful. The things about how we, daily stand-ups, those are a chance to help recognize when we are procrastinating on something. Hey, that task that you said you were going to do yesterday isn't moving on the board. Can I help you with that? There's an opportunity there to recognize when we have team members who are struggling with procrastination and to help them put one foot in front of the other and get started on working on things. I think the thing about deadlines is really interesting. When you go back to the study at the beginning about which environment people were more successful when they had fixed deadlines as opposed to deadlines they set themselves. If you're doing Scrum, this is kind of built in. You have both in your system, right? Where there's a fixed cadence of you will deliver something by this date. Gives you that structure of an external deadline, while still giving people the flexibility within the plan to go, I think it's going to take me this long to get something done. So you've got both deadlines that people are setting themselves, but also still the external deadline that people feel they need to adhere to. You know, I see Kanban teams where they really get stuck in the weeds because they don't have any external, and part of it is I work a lot in sort of government and big enterprise situations where they maybe don't have pressing deadlines as people who live in the real world anyways. But I see people who get stuck. So having that combination of externally imposed deadlines, we need to do something by this date, but also giving people the flexibility to plan and set their own deadlines, I think is a really important tool for overcoming procrastination. Yeah, that was pretty much it about procrastination. I'm just trying to think. What I want you to do right now, just before we switch to talk about the next topic, because I want to talk about a very special form of procrastination, is think about that list that you made. Think about the things that you are procrastinating on, and just take 30 seconds and think about, for each thing that you wrote on your list, what is something that I can do to help myself get past the emotion that I'm feeling about it, the barrier that I'm feeling about it. Okay, we'll take 30 seconds and then we're going to switch to talking about a very special form of procrastination. Okay, if I could ask everybody to stand up for a minute. I just want to do a quick survey of the room and it'll be easiest for everybody standing when we start. In this room, if you are a person who checks your email once a day, I'd like you to sit down right now. How about, yeah, only once a day. I would have been very, very surprised if anybody had sat down. What if anybody only check their email like 3 or 4 times a day? If you do, please sit down now. Oh, I've got a couple of people, okay. Anybody check their email just once an hour? If you do, sit down. The rest of us are still standing. How often do you check your email? Continually. I know, I've seen people with their phones in my very exciting talk going, oh, I just got to check to see if there's anything there. You can sit down now. This is a really, really insidious problem in terms of trying to create flow in our work lives. It's a very special form of procrastination because it's one that we can use. I'll get to that as soon as I've checked my email. How many people in the room have done that and then an hour later they realize they're still reading their email or suddenly they're researching something on Wikipedia or Stack Exchange, you know, and they haven't gotten to that thing? It's because the way our brains work, which of these things is not like the others? Which of these things is not quite the same? The reality is there isn't a whole lot of difference between that rat in the Skinner box who is being conditioned about when they're going to expect food pellets and somebody at the casino who's going, the next round. I'm going to win on the next round. I'm just going to make one more bet at us checking our email. What happens is when we check our email, the thing with the rats is this. The rats are commonly used in experiments to test operant conditioning, right? And there's a couple of very basic scenarios, something people do in university experiments, where you can very easily train rats. The rats are trained, they press the bar, they get food. They press the bar, they get food. They press the bar, they get food. They learn that they get food, happiness, and joy. Other rats are trained that you press the bar, you get food. You press the bar, nothing happens. You press the bar, nothing happens. You press the bar, you get food. It doesn't happen every time, but it happens some of the time. This is called variable, I don't know if you get the right word, it's variable schedule conditioning. You don't get the reward every time you do the thing, but you get it frequently enough that your brain is going, woohoo, I get the thing, I get the thing. Whether it's a food pellet, whether it's a win at the gambling table, whether it is, something interesting in my email or on social media. It's all the same response in your brain. Woohoo, I got something good. And the result is, when you set up that kind of conditioning, it is really, really hard to train yourself out of it. When it's fixed schedule conditioning, this happens, good thing, this happens, good thing, the thing stops happening, you stop experiencing the good feelings, you can stop doing that behavior because you learn very, very quickly, it's not going to make me feel good, I'm not going to do that anymore. But when the reward is intermittent, it is really, really hard to train yourself not to do that thing in hopes of getting the reward. And email and social media are really like that in our lives. We've got our phones, it's omnipresent. I know people who know better, who check their mail at stoplights. They don't do it while they're driving anymore. But they know they shouldn't be, but it's like, woohoo, I just gotta check, I want that little hit. So how do you get out of doing this? Again, first, recognize that it's going on. Secondly, one technique you might use is not just going, ooh, I'm going to stop checking my email. Turn off your notifications, first of all, because they will tempt you. But set up notifications for the things that have a really good chance of being important. So you know you're going to not miss those. So if it's an email from an important coworker or stakeholder, if it's an email from your spouse, something that you know is going to be important, set up notifications just for those. So you're setting up the behavior pattern in your brain that, every time I check, it's because there is an important thing there, not just, I hope that there's going to be an important thing there. That's one pattern you might use. I highlight this because constant attention to email and social media is something that disrupts flow for so many of us. Everybody goes down to check their phone and tweet, ooh, constant attention to social media is a bad thing. But it's true. It makes it hard for us to focus. It makes it hard for us to get our work done. And of course, you can just send good emails to yourself. The last part of my talk, the research that I want to talk about in the last part of this talk, is about motivation and what actually gives us joy in our work, what makes us happy, how to motivate us in our work. If you've seen the Dan Pink TED Talk, you've seen him talk about how what really makes that money does not drive performance, that it boils down to autonomy, mastery, and purpose. That's his thesis. But I want to share some research experiments with you that he did and some of his colleagues did that build this out a little bit, because I think there's some really interesting stuff in there for us to think about how we organize our work and how we organize our relationships with coworkers. So I want to talk a little bit about motivation and the emotion, the feelings that help us. I know I'm using this F word all the time in this talk, feelings. But how we feel about our work and what motivates us. And talk a little bit about the elephant in the room around money. Because conventional wisdom is that if we want to incent people to do good things, we can pay them more. If we want to reward people for doing good things, we should give them cash bonuses. Because, hey, we all like cash. I have bills to pay too. But there's some research that shows that other factors are way more important in encouraging people to do good work. So Dan Ariely and his colleagues did some experiments with Lego. I love talking about Lego. I had to slide some into my talk, because I'll be doing another Lego talk this afternoon too. They did some experiments about that showed how easy it was to suck the joy out of people's work. And what they did in their experiments is they had people come in and they had them build Bionicles, which are those little Lego figures. And what they did is, for the first Bionicle that people built, they paid them a small amount of money, maybe $3. And when they built the first Bionicle, they said, do you want to build another one? And if the participants said yes, they paid them a little less money, $2.70. Third Bionicle, if they chose to build it, $2.40. So diminishing financial returns. And they asked people about how much they enjoyed building with Lego. And what happened was, there were a couple of cases. In the first case, Joe would come to the lab. The researcher would say to Joe, hey, do you want to build a Bionicle? And Joe would say, yeah, sure. And Joe would build the Bionicle. The researcher would say, thank you. Take the Bionicle, put it under the desk, ask Joe, would you like to build another Bionicle? And Joe would say yes, knowing that he was going to get paid less for it. And the process would repeat. But at the end of each thing, and going into the experiment, each participant was told, at the end of the experiment, we're going to take apart all of the Bionicles anyways. We have a limited set. So they knew that their work was not going to be permanent. But in the first case, every time they built a Bionicle, the researcher would thank them, put it under the desk, give them a new one to build. In the second case, the volunteers were, same situation. They were told that they would get paid $3 for the first one, $2.70 for the second one, $2.40 for the third one. But what would happen in the second case is, as they built each Bionicle, the researcher would take the Bionicle, say, do you want to build another one? And as the participant was building the next Bionicle, disassemble the first one right in front of them. Yeah, exactly. And the result was that it was unbelievable, even though that was the only way in which, actually there were two significant things that varied there. And I think there was actually a third case in the experiment that I forgot to mention, where they just left out the thank you part. But it's essentially the same experiment. I'm going to build something, you're going to pay me some money from it. At the end of the experiment, it's all taking part anyways. But what they saw in the lab was that in the condition where the Bionicle was dismantled in front of the participants' eyes, they didn't build anywhere near as many Bionicles, even though they were getting paid the same amount of money to do so. They gave up sooner, and they reported that it was less fun to build Lego because they saw their work being dismantled in front of them all the time. And it's really, and also, as I said, the condition that I kind of forgot to mention, where they just didn't thank people for their Lego, for their building effort. They just put it under the thing and gave them choice to build another one. Had very similar results. People built less, and they didn't persevere, and they reported that they were less happy about having fun in the task. They weren't having as much fun building because their work was not being acknowledged. It's a really simple experiment, but it shows how important it is for people to see that their work has value and meaning, even if they know it's going to be taken apart later. And I think this is really important because sometimes in an Agile universe, we know that our stuff is not necessarily fixed and everlasting. We are going to have to rework things, and that's okay. But you have to recognize the work when it is done. And I think a lot of the teams that I work with who are struggling, this is one of the practices they forget about. They have very, very superficial reviews at the end of the sprint. Yeah, we got some stuff done. And nobody says thank you for the work. Nobody takes a moment to appreciate, wow, you put a lot of effort into that. Thank you. And something that simple can make a big difference as to whether people feel valued or whether they just sort of feel, I'm here for the paycheck. And being here for the paycheck is not the best way to get productivity. And it's not the best way to get productivity out of people it's not the best way to get effectiveness out of people, and it's not the best way to build employee satisfaction, for sure. So we need to think about that simple power of acknowledging people's work and saying thank you. The last experiment that I want to talk about is about a series of experiments they did about the different motivational effects of asking people to work for different kinds of rewards. He did a series of experiments about testing whether people would perform better when there are cash rewards. These experiments aren't even so much about performance, they're just about how much effort people would put into things for different kinds of rewards. So there were 3 conditions created where, and they did this in a couple of different contexts, where in some of the experiments, one case people were asked to do work just for the goodness of helping the experimenters get something done. In some cases, they were offered a cash reward, either a very small amount of money or a larger amount of money. Research lab conditions are talking like 50 cents or $5 for doing something. And the work in question, it was very mechanical work. So this wasn't creative work where we have this effect where motivating, giving people cash, we know that that decreases their ability to perform. This is just very repetitious work. In some cases, it was like dragging circles from one side of the screen to another. So one condition was about giving them money. Another condition was giving them a chocolate, in fact, a candy gift that was approximate in value to the money. And there were actually, so just so that you can see where the 3 cases are. So there's a condition where they weren't offered anything. There was a condition where they were offered cash. There was a condition where they were offered a gift. And then there's another condition, which I'm not sure is shown on this slide, where they were offered the gift, but the gift was described in cash value. So one set of participants would be told, okay, based on your, we're going to ask you to do this task, and your reward will be a candy bar or a box of Godiva chocolates. Another set of participants were told, we're going to ask you to do this task, and your reward will be a 50-cent candy bar or a $5 box of Godiva chocolates. So there was a monetary value attached to the cash. And I want to highlight that because as soon as we talk about money in work environments, it causes some weird decision making. And I think this is really, really important in an employment context because even though we're fundamentally there to earn money for our employers, the work we do on a day-to-day basis, the way we relate to our teams and our customers, we're really being driven more by social norms than by financial norms. And so being really careful about when we talk about money, I think is kind of important. So I'm not going to quiz you about this because we're running low on time. I want to show you the results. And the results showed that there's a couple of interesting things going on here. First of all, in the experiment, just in the effort level for doing a mundane task, this is the people who were asked to do it just from the goodness of their hearts. Just do this to help out the experimenters. That's how much effort they put in, that's how much work they performed. These are the people who did it in return for the gift. This is for the small gift, this is for the large gift. You can see there's not a big difference in the effect of a big gift versus a small gift. And that's not much different from the people who were asked to do it for no reason at all. These are the people who were asked to do it for money. Low cash reward, high cash reward. In all cases with the cash reward, there's less performance than when people were asked to do it just out of the goodness of their hearts or in return for some kind of acknowledgement. Furthermore, how long they spent at the task was less when they were being paid for it than when they were being recognized other ways. So not only does monetary incentives diminish performance, it diminishes effort, it diminishes perseverance, even for boring, mundane tasks. And we really need to think about this. And the same effects were observed when the reward was the monetized gift as it was the money. Even if you were giving somebody the same box of chocolate as a reward for the task, if you told them it was a $5 box of chocolate as opposed to a box of chocolate, just mentioning the money turned this into a market value transaction rather than a social norm transaction, and they performed less. This is a really, really important finding for thinking about how do we try to incent people in the workplace? How do we help people to perform at their best? which leads to the very last experiment that I want to talk about, which is just there's some evolving research going on in terms of different kinds of bonuses. From the first experiment, it's pretty clear that trying to bribe people with money to work better backfires. Because as soon as we introduce money into the equation, people make this calculation about, is this worth the time and effort I'm putting into it? And they're less inclined to work harder, to work better, than they are if they're being driven by more social factors, by gifts, by recognition. So some of Dan Ariely's colleagues set up an experiment with bonus systems, and they compared 3 conditions where and they did this in the real world. This wasn't in a lab. They worked with a sales team at a pharmaceutical company. They worked with an athletic team, and I think there was one case where they did it in a lab study. And they set up 3 different test conditions where in one case, the bonus that people got for their work was cash. Small amounts of cash, but cash in your pocket. In one case, the bonus that they got was a voucher to donate to charity. You would get cash, but the condition was that you would then pass the cash along to charity of your choice. Another condition that they set up was you would get a bonus, a cash bonus, but rather than going into your pocket, what you were expected to do with your bonus was buy a token of recognition for a colleague. It was $10, $20. It was, buy somebody some candy or a bottle of wine, take a colleague out to lunch. And in each of these conditions, they looked at the effect on performance and people's job satisfaction based on receiving these bonuses. And what they found as a result is in the circumstances, as you might guess from what we've been talking about so far, in the circumstances where it was cash in pocket as a result for good work, people were like, okay, yeah, whatever, I get to buy my lunch, woohoo, this is good. When the bonus was a gift that they could give to somebody else, their performance was better, and they reported being happier. Whether it was something that they could give to charity, or whether it was a token, whether it was money that they were instructed to buy a token for a colleague. In both of those conditions, their performance went up and their self-reported happiness with their job went up. I think this is a really interesting thing to think about in terms of how we think about how do we incent people. I had a conversation recently. People like to be able to do things with other people. I did a workshop last week with some teams that I'm working with, a client in the US, to talk about how do you want to be recognized. And the things that were really, really high up on their list were, first of all, getting thanked by their bosses for their work, because they didn't feel they were getting enough of that. They were building bionicles, and somebody was sticking them in a drawer and not acknowledging what was going on. But they also mentioned that they really appreciated getting things that they could pass along to others. The program that they wanted to have reinstated was that their employer used to, as a thank you for doing something big, buy takeout dinner for the whole team that they could take home to their family. And I thought that was a fantastic way to recognize people for their work. Because not only are you giving them a gift, you're giving them a gift that they can then take home and use to spend time with their family. And that was a really, really powerful motivator. I think it's really important when we look at how we restructure our incentive and our performance plans to help support Agile work that we take these things into consideration. How do we help people help other people do work? How do we help people recognize their colleagues more for the work they're doing? Because that's how we're going to help people improve their performance, by helping them strengthen their connections to their communities, whether it's their immediate community, the people that they work with, or whether it's the larger community of people who they interact with and they want to help. So just to wrap up this talk, because we are now out of time, I just want to quickly review. We talked about procrastination and how the importance of when we're dealing with procrastination, we have to keep in mind that it's not just time management. It's really, we have to think about how people feel about their tasks. And in order to overcome procrastination, we have to deal with those emotions. We talked about motivation and the importance of how people feel about their work as a motivator for getting things done. It's not just a cash transaction, I'll do work, you give me money. It's really important to acknowledge people for the effort they have put in. It's really important for connection in terms of what really makes us tick, it's not just about being recognized ourselves, but giving opportunities to help others, to recognize others for their achievements. These are the things that the research that's going on show us about how we work. And as you go off and you figure out what you're doing in your environment in an agile work environment, I want you to think about the fact that it's not just a process. You have to take into consideration, how are people connected with each other? How are people getting joy out of their work? And what are we doing in our environment that will help drive these tendencies the research shows us, or that will unintentionally squish them? Maybe we want to stop doing those things. So in closing, what I want you to do is just think about some of the research we've covered today. And I want you to think about, what can you do differently on Monday morning to help, one, avoid your own tendency to procrastinate, but two, to help acknowledge your teammates, your coworkers, the people you work with, help acknowledge them for the work that they're doing, and help build motivation in your team by focusing on the factors that actually drive us. If you'd like to learn more about the research, there's a couple places you might want to look. Dan Ariely's website is a great place to go, and he has a whole page of links to his research studies. There's a couple of fantastic resources on procrastination. Procrastination CA, Timothy Pitchell is a professor at Carleton University in Ottawa, and he's got a great series of resources on his website, things about how you can deal with procrastination. And then if you want to learn more about the actual research that went into the motivational stuff, I've got a couple of links up there to the research papers that Dan Ariely and his team has published showing these disconnections between monetary incentives and performance. On that note, I really would like to thank you for your time and attention today. I hope you've learned something. I learned a lot writing this talk. Ways to modulate my own procrastination, for sure. But I want to thank you for your participation today.